Wow, the wind is really getting up. As long as it doesn't start to pour down with rain, we're fine. Right, here's what we want to do with the adapter plate while I just shuffle in. Where the engine and the gearbox sits now, we've modified the firewall. If you remember, on the inside of the firewall, the piece that came out and then back in, we had to cut out actually to fit this part in. If we come up slightly, this part in here. Now that acts sort of as a rain gutter. And the rain then runs off either side and down actually on the inside of the front arches. Now, we've obviously cut that and welded it flat. So now, when it rains, a small amount of water doesn't run off either side. It comes down the middle on the inside of the engine bay. And actually, it lands about here. So, to keep the water running off, and not seeping through the adapter plate and getting all over the starter and making our flex plate all rusty, we're going to seal him up. Not the bottom piece, but certainly the top. Come down. From here, we're going to go all the way across, down to this other peg here, just to stop any water getting in if it does rain. Truthfully, this car is not going to be going out in the rain. The only time it's going to be in the rain is if I take the car out and get caught by the weather. So I won't intentionally be driving it in the wet or the snow, or if it's really windy. It's basically just when it's nice and sunny, the car's going to come out to play. But just in case, we are going to do that now, because obviously once it's bolted up, it'd be an arse to go back and do it again. So let's do that now. Alright, apologies for the shaky cam, but we are off the camera stand so we can have a look at this thing in detail. So, if we look at the actual adapter plate, there's a number of bolts that hold this in. And if we start over in this corner, this one, and around here, this one, and this one down here. 4. These are all M10. They're a fine pitch thread. These come with the kit. Now, there's 4 more smaller ones. This one, this one, this one, and this one under here. These are all M8. And if we come across to our sheets to look at our torque settings, we can see that the automatic transmission assembly into the cylinder block is 72 Newton meters, but into the oil pan is only 37. So our M10 bolts are up to 72, but these 4 smaller ones, the M8 bolts, if I come back, you can see them from here to here. These are all coming in at 37. So let's get those tightened up. To complete our clutch setup, we obviously need, well, the clutch. Now it's made up of a couple of different bits actually. We need the friction plate from this kit here. This is for various Fords and Volvos. We don't need the pressure plate or any of the other bits that come with it. I did actually look at just buying the friction plate, and it was really hard just to get the friction plate on its own, so we ended up with the whole kit. Move him aside. Yeah, he's kind of heavy. And then we need the pressure plate from this guy, and this is from a BMW. For those of you out there attempting the same thing, this is the part number for the clutch kit for the BMW. And I think we probably already caught it on video, but That's the number for the Ford. So just to make sure that this is all going to fit, I've just taken the Ford friction plate and offered it up against the input shaft on the RX8 box, and it fits. So, well, that's good news. To be fair, they do say it fits, and they're not wrong. It does. It's a good fit. It is quite tight though, where the gearbox has been sat with no protection. I really should have oiled up the input shaft and then covered it with a bag or something, so it does have some surface rust. We're going to get a little wire brush and clean him so that we don't get this binding on the way in, but it is the correct size, so that's great. What we don't have in all of these clutch kits that we've now got kicking around is an alignment tool. So we're going to need to make something. I'm not sure what though. I think it's going to need to be some sort of hex... Oh, you can't see what I'm doing. Apologies. Some sort of hex key of the correct size with a lot of tape on the end to fit in here. That's a bit bodgy, but we don't have the tool. So if it doesn't work, obviously, then we're not going to get the box in and we'll have to order one. But I think in the interest of keeping things moving, we will try and make something. Luckily, my next door neighbour came to the rescue and lent me his alignment tool, as you can see here. Thanks, mate. It's the next morning, and as you can hear, the neighbours are doing some work to their garden. Over there somewhere. To be fair, it's usually me making noise on a Saturday morning, so, you know, we can't be too cross. With everything over this side now done and dusted, aligned properly with my next door neighbour's alignment tool and all torqued down, we need to work on the gearbox. So we've taken just a bit of emery cloth and we've cleaned up the input shaft and we've cleaned up the splines as well, just with a little wire brush. Now there's a couple of bits that we're going to need to replace on the gearbox before we chuck it in. Right, the first thing we're going to replace is this guy. This is the release bearing, and actually noisy and worn release bearings is a well-known problem on the RX8. I'd love to hold this close to the camera and spin it around so you could hear how rough it sounds, but over the noise of the wind and the next door neighbour's gardening, there is no chance. It's so noisy. So anyway, this one is ruined, and they're only £30 to replace. It would be ridiculous, having done all the work, not to replace it. So he is out, and we're replacing with a nice new one. So that's the first thing. The other thing we're going to replace is the slave cylinder. These are about £50-ish to replace, and while it's on the outside of the gearbox, once this whole lot is in the car, it is impossible, as I think I've already said, even to get to the bleed nipple and the clutch line attachment, let alone get a spanner in, get this guy off and replace him entirely. The engine and box would have to come out. So this whole unit is being replaced as well. This we are still waiting on. It should arrive in the next couple of days, but we can crack on without this guy. Yeah, this used one is not going back on the car. This little guy, by the way, is a tiny adapter piece that you get with the kit, and it moves the angle up very slightly, as you can see, by just a few mil, but it means it clears the adapter plate. So but yeah, that's that guy. Right, let's install some pieces. We've given the fork a quick clean. We just wiped it down with some wax and grease remover and got a lot of, go down here, the remains of the Exceedy clutch. This is kind of what's left of him. So we've given this guy a bit of a clean, and by doing so you can see exactly where the contact points are and where you need to grease. So we've got these points on the fork that go in the back of the release bearing, and on the back you've got this little piece for the ball that goes in there. So we're going to grease those up and then put this piece back in. Alright, so all I've done is slip the release bearing onto the fork. You can see where we've greased it on the inside. This part goes up into the hole here. We slip the release bearing over and you push him on like that. That is pretty simple. Now this retaining clip, you want to make sure that that's nice and snug and that this is held in firmly, which it is, which is great, and that this moves freely backs and forwards. We've greased this part here as well, so that is rude actually, but excellent. That works lovely. Perfect. The rubber boot, which I've given a quick clean down, just presses over the end of the fork, and then there's a little groove on the inside and he just seats in the gearbox like that. Now, apart from the slave cylinder, that is everything that we want to replace in the gearbox. What we're going to do now is we're going to pop the slave cylinder back in, just temporarily, just to stop everything moving around. So he just basically bolts in with 2 bolts. Super simple. If you could get to him easily, if you can reach him, it's really easy to change. It's just, well, you can't reach him. So we'll pop him on just temporarily for the moment, and then we're going to put a little bit of copper grease on the splines and the shaft where it goes into our spigot bearing on our flywheel, and then we're going to try and line him up. My goodness, it is on. Okay, I've managed to mess up the filming of Gearbox Installation, so I've left everything how it was to show you exactly how I've done it. First, I've used thin strips of laminate wood flooring to lift the gearbox up level with the engine. Now the engine isn't sitting entirely flat, it's tipping back slightly, so come backwards. I've then used the jack to lift him up ever so slowly until the 2 were lined up. Even doing that, I could not get the box to slide home easily. What I actually had to do is pick it up around here and lift it slightly and wobble it side to side as I was pushing it forward and just sort of jiggle it home. It's quite heavy to pick up and sort of manually wiggle around, but once I did that, it slid on really well. So I've got these done up just hand tight at the moment, so it's time to get the torque wrench, torque these guys down. All the bolts have gone in beautifully. I think we might be there. Oh yes. Look what we have made. A 4.3 Lexus V8 bolted to a 6-speed gearbox. The last little bits of prep are now done before we put the engine in. So we've got our new slave cylinder for our clutch, and I've bent up just this little U-bend here with some pipe just to give us a better shot with the braided line up and over. Just popped a P-clip in to keep him in place. We'll have another one on that side when we're all in. Our 18mm pipes for the engine are now on. This is for the heater matrix in and out, and you can see that we've got 2 clips on. Once this engine's in, you cannot get to these pipes at all, and I don't want to be pulling the engine out for something as silly as a leaky pipe, so 2 clips on each just to make sure. And that's everything done and ready. Oh, obviously we sprayed the cam covers because, you know, it's rude not to. So it's time to see if all this will now fit back in the car.